well. Okay, let's get started. We see people filtering in a bit more. We're really fortunate today to have with us the senior economic team to the presidential campaign of Gustavo Petro. They have been with the candidate for some time, formulating his policies, and they're quite busy at this moment, but they've taken time out to do this with us at the CCA. So we're very indebted and appreciative of them. Today we have with us, as the announcement indicated, Ricardo Bonilla, who's a professor at the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, Diego Guevara, who's a professor at the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, Luis Fernando Medina, professor at the Universidad Carlos III de Madrid. We will start with Luis Fernando giving his overview of the economic proposals of candidate Petro. I'm sure there will be questions, and we will take them today. We'll try very hard to take them. Just use the question and answer box, and not the chat box, and we will entertain them when the time comes. I think without any further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Luis Fernando, and thanks everybody for being with us again this morning.
Thank you, Ken. Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here, and I also thank you for the keen interest you've shown in our proposal. So, in the interest of time, I will kind of cut to the chase. So basically, the proposal of the Pacto Histórico, which is the umbrella coalition under which Gustavo Petro is running, the economic proposal is based on a diagnosis about Colombia's economy and what we believe are the structural changes that need to take place. So the diagnosis for us is pretty clear. Colombia has become, over the past decades, increasingly reliant on primary exports, especially coal and oil, and that has created a problematic pattern in which you see slowdown in growth. So Colombia's growth over the past 3 decades has actually been about 1.3% slower than it used to be, which it comes to, when you do the compound interest, it comes to, had Colombia retained the growth rate it used to have, the economy would now be 47% larger, which is not nothing. Okay? Not only growth has slowed down, it has become more volatile. So now we have years of booms, but also years of frightening recessions. In fact, lately we've had a very, very tepid growth, which, of course, pre-pandemics, of course, it's not pre-pandemics, because pandemics has kind of funked everything up. So the last years have been pretty timid growth, which I think is actually negative in per capita terms. And not only that, we have had chronic unemployment. So through the century, the past few decades, unemployment has kind of stabilized at an average of 13%, which is quite a lot. On top of that, incredibly large informal sector. Okay? Although this is typical of Latin America, but Colombia estimates say that around 50% of the labor force, maybe even 60%, according to some estimates, might actually be employed in the informal sector, which means that they are trapped in a situation of dismal access to credit and low productivity, no access to technology, and so on. So, and that's looking backwards. If we look forward, the problem is that our pattern of exports is also problematic because, first of all, we are not a great oil-producing country. We've been impersonating one for a while, but we are not really a great oil-producing country. But still, we are acquiring all the problems of this pattern of exports, in the sense that the forecasts indicate that the price of oil might drop precipitously in 10 or 15 years. So we think that it is not a smart bet at this point for Colombia to keep depending so much on oil and coal. So we need to diversify the economy. and therefore, how to accomplish that? And here is probably the major conceptual difference between our campaign and the discourse that had settled in over the past years. We believe that the way to break this cycle is by effecting several structural changes in the economy. And the structural changes, they are ambitious, and therefore they have to be well funded. It makes no sense to launch a huge offensive of structural changes that are not well funded, and that therefore you're just planting a bunch of time bombs, of macroeconomic time bombs in the years ahead, which will maybe even blow up in your own face if you don't do it right. So our plan starts with an ambitious goal in terms of revenue, and then ambitious goals in terms of expenditure. Okay. In terms of revenue, we believe, and we've been loudly and proudly calling for a major fiscal reform, a fiscal reform that will significantly increase the tax revenue of the country. We have been talking about a fiscal reform. I mean, if we put together the ideas that we have been combining, because this is all building on top of layers and layers of diagnosis in Colombia. So we believe we're pretty upbeat that if we combine everything together, we can have a major package of fiscal consolidation that would even raise revenue up by as much as 5% of GDP in a way that is progressive, efficient, and transparent. I will get more. I'll say more about that in a few minutes. Okay, but our goal in that sense, in the revenue front, is to significantly increase tax intake, which will place Colombia's finances on a firm footing. It will have major macroeconomic effect on the savings rate, which will also release some of the exchange rate pressure. It will help mitigate the trade deficit and so on, and will allow us to, and will also contribute just by itself, will contribute to a diversification effort on top of what we're planning to do with public investment. Okay, so that has been our centerpiece, and we have been criticized for that. We have been told that, oh, that has never happened. We've never been able to do fiscal consolidation and so on. And we keep saying, well, yeah, it has never happened. Keep in mind that we live in times in which many things that never happened are happening right now. So we think that the politics is there, the alignment of the coalitions is there, and the ideas are there. So if we just lead the process, we can get it done in a way that is consensual, that builds robust support for our fiscal package. And notice that at this point, it used to be until a couple of weeks ago that other campaigns were in a way embracing the notion of fiscal consolidation. There were differences regarding the pace and the intensity and so on, but some of them, they were also making gestures in this direction. Okay, that is no longer true. The candidate that made it to the runoff, okay, has not embraced the idea of fiscal consolidation, and his tax messaging, not to put too fine a point on it, has baffled many economists. He has been calling for a reform of the VAT, which sounds like a decrease of the VAT, but when you look at it, it may actually be a substantial increase in indirect taxes in Colombia, which, if it is to raise any significant amount of revenue, would probably hurt consumption of the low income classes in Colombia in big time. So I think that, if I may say so, I think that our fiscal package is way more solid, and it is a package that has, like I said before, it puts together a lot of ideas that have been worked around for years. So what are the main ingredients of our fiscal proposal? Okay. Well, the anomalies are there. Colombia's tax system is already well known for having several pathologies. One of them is it depends a lot on corporate taxes and too little on personal income taxes. Okay, that is completely at variance with what happens in OECD countries, and it means that basically our tax code has been taxing savings and not consumption, which is exactly the opposite of what any textbook would tell you. Okay, any textbook would tell you that if you want a tax code that is compatible with growth, you should tax consumption, not savings. So how do we do that? Well, we need to reduce the component of corporate tax rate. We think we can lower the corporate tax rates. We may even go to a flat tax rate of 24% or 25%. Conceivably even allowing for a 21% tax rate for small and medium companies, small and medium enterprises. Okay, and at the same time, we can raise the personal tax, the personal tax rate. But personal tax state, probably we don't even need to create new tax brackets. We can actually maintain the current brackets and raise revenue through the personal tax code if we do several things. One is, for example, unifying rates at the personal level. We have different sources of income or tax at different rates. If we just unify the rates there, that will already raise a lot of revenue. If we clarify the structure of assets in Colombia, whereby only assets directly linked to the economic activity of a company belong to the company, and everything else is hived off and placed where it is supposed to be, which is at the individuals that own them. And there we can tax it at personal tax rates. That will also raise a lot of revenue, for example. So this we might actually introduce for a temporary estate tax or a modest estate tax, as we used to have during the, I think 2006, it was introduced an estate tax, which was phased down. We can probably introduce something of that as well. So everything, the idea is if we start taxing consumption of the better off segments of the population, we can significantly raise revenue from the personal tax code and lower the corporate tax rate. Notice we think that this can be done without affecting the VAT, because we got the message that the country does not want fiscal adjustment to fall on the shoulders of the popular classes. So we believe that the consumption of low-income segments of society need to be protected, and so we think that our plan can work without affecting the VAT, okay, without raising the price of the basic consumption basket for low-income citizens. Okay, so that's basically the centerpiece of our plan. A fiscal pact. The idea is already there. They have been considered for many years. They have been discarded for political reasons. This is not a lack of knowledge. It has been a lack of political will. So that package, we think that we can go to Congress and tell it the time to do it is now. Let's do it now. And we think that that will have immediately a salutary effect over the macroeconomic outlook of the country. It will help us to help us to chart a path for debt. Right now, Colombia's external debt, of course, it increased a lot because of the pandemics. We need to bring it back to the trajectory it had in the past, which was of gradual increases. We think that the trajectory we were seeing from, let's say, 2000, from the last decade, was an okay trajectory. We think that debt in Colombia went from 30-something, 35% to the 52%, okay, gradually with risk premia coming down. So we think that that was okay. If we can maintain Colombia at those prudent levels of debt, okay, the market is financing that at okay rates. Now, there's nothing explosive about that. We just need to, again, get our fiscal act together. And at those levels, the Colombian economy is okay, and it will be able to retain access to capital markets and so on, which is something that you would expect a middle-income country to have. We need to finance our development with access to capital markets. So we think that with this exercise of fiscal consolidation, we can go back to that trajectory. Okay, it might. I mean, we need probably. It won't be smart to slam on the brake of debt right now and try to bring it down immediately from where it is now, 60-something% down to 50, 55. But we can chart a path of debt reduction and bring it back to where it was. So that is the first benefit. Like I said before, it will also help us address the chronic trade deficit, because of course the fiscal, anything that is good for the fiscal deficit is good for the trade deficit. Okay. It will help us also at more at a micro level. It will help us ignite processes or basically activate domestic savings, so that through public investment we can create assets that will activate the process, the endogenous process of private investment. From a macro perspective, people always talk about public investment crowding out private investment. Okay, well, but if you look at experiences of success, okay, in growth across many countries, what you find is that often public investment, when done right, actually crowds in private investment, because if you target it to the right places, it will send the right signals to the different actors and will generate a process of investment. How can we do that? Well, basically, what you know, if you go down to the details of productivity policy in Colombia, what you will see is that we have a nice array of institutions and policies and practices when it comes to productivity, but they are lopsided. They end up being directed to the sectors that are already doing well. Okay, so we have, for instance, when it comes to agriculture, we have good technology transfer for those crops that are already exporting or on the cusp of exporting. Okay. The same thing happens in industry and so on. Okay, so we have an array of institutions that have been emphasizing the growth of those firms that are already doing okay. I keep saying that our policy does what bad teachers do, which is it focuses on the good students. So we need to redirect the emphasis of our productivity policy to small and medium enterprises. Okay. We need to rely, for example, and that's why we have been calling for the revitalization of the set of investment of development banking that we used to have. As a second story banking that is better able to irrigate credit and small and medium enterprises. We believe that the public sector can also help consolidate and rationalize the informal sector and the sector of small and medium enterprises by using this muscle as a procurer, for example, creating large markets that break bottlenecks of scale economies, that brings clarity so that asymmetric information is addressed. You can clarify the rules of those markets, give incentives for people to formalize and so on. And therefore that will, first of all, it will increase the productivity of the economy, because now you're going to be acting where the steepest curves are. You're going to be having incidents in those segments of the economy. And second, it will also help the process of diversification of exports. Because if there is one thing that trade theory has learned over the past few decades, with the paradigm shift due to firm heterogeneity, is that export success is not just driven by comparative advantage. Export success is a result of shifts in productivity, and they happen throughout the entire ecosystem of firms. Okay, research, there's one consistent finding of research in trade theory, which is that country after country, sector after sector, only a handful of firms are able to export. Okay, and that indicates that country after country, sector after sector, exports happen when firms overcome certain thresholds of cost, okay? And then they can start exporting. So what you want to do, if you want export diversification, is you want to act across the board. You want to be able to change the productivity of every firm, because they are all interlocking, okay? In ways that the pattern of cost is shifting, so that some of them will start thriving in the export market. So in that sense, we are no longer treating the domestic market as a nuisance, which was what used to happen over the past few decades. It's just, well, it's a bar, we don't need the export market, the domestic market for anything. We're treating the domestic market as a training field for firms. This is where they learn. This is where they start their learning processes. And if we help them in that process, then they will start overcoming cost barriers and being able to export. So in that sense, we believe that this, like I said, across the board strategy of diversification is more promising than just finding a new shiny object that will replace coal and oil by something else. Okay, of course we're optimistic about the prospects that Colombia has in many aspects. We think that Colombia, of course, tourism has been mentioned, the campaign trail, but we also think that agro-industry, for instance, if we're able to create value chains for some of our agricultural products instead of just bringing them out as commodities, we have potential there. We have potential with human capital exports, for example, services in the digital era. For example, I am particularly optimistic with telemedicine, for example. I think that Colombia has good potential in that sense. And in general, in all this new fourth industrial revolution economy, I think we can thrive. Of course, we need to make a big push for digital infrastructure in the economy, but we have the fundamentals there in terms of creating export success based on human capital and technology. Okay. So that gives us also a map of where we want to place investment. Like I said before, we should shift its direction to generating public goods and coordination that help us link small and medium enterprises with the large ones. Okay, but also we need another drive for infrastructure. Okay, we think that Colombia needs to upgrade its transportation network. Railroad, we think, is the way of the future because that can be electrified. It can reduce our reliance on oil, domestic consumption of oil, for example, and it will also have better cost. It is more cost effective in terms of transportation, which will make us more competitive in the world markets as well. Okay. There are issues also with land. I haven't mentioned the other source of fiscal consolidation, which is we will get serious about the exercise that has been long delayed of updating our cadaster so that we can start taxing land at its right rates, because there is a major delay in the assessments of land, and therefore the tax take that comes from land has been very low, and that means that it is a breeding ground for inefficient practices. So we think that updating our cadaster, bringing finally our land tax system to where it is supposed to be, it will help us rationalize the patterns of land tenure. It will give the incentives for landowners to finally go into more efficient methods of land exploitation and so on. Okay, so I mean, I'm kind of running over what I thought and what the time we have allotted. So I think I will just leave it open to questions. I'll just leave you with this main idea, like I said before: ambitious goals on the revenue side, ambitious goals on the expenditure side. The idea is fiscal consolidation that will lead to more public investment, that will activate processes of endogenous growth, that will in turn lead to export diversification and employment. Those are the key points of our strategy. Are there any questions? Ken, do you have a question? I think you're.
Sorry, I was on mute. Sorry. I was. I'm out in LA. It's a little early in the morning. I'm at the summit. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Luis Fernando. There are some questions, and maybe I'll go to them, unless Diego or Ricardo wanted to jump in at this point. Should I go to the questions or?
No, I think that if you want, we can go straight to the question.
Okay, great.
Right now, I don't have nothing else to add.
Okay, fine. Okay, so Luis Fernando, there's two often repeated criticisms of candidate Petro's platform. One is the idea that it wants to cut off a cash cow that comes out of the oil industry, the regalias and the monies that come from that. At least in the short term, Colombia is not ready to turn off the faucet of the money that it's getting from oil and gas. And the other criticism that has come from some quarters is about his plans for revising the pension system and the pension plan. So it might be useful if you wouldn't mind addressing
Sure.
those.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so oil. First of all, our proposal has been mischaracterized many times in many ways. Okay, our proposal is meant to create a gradual off-ramp, a smooth landing from the oil economy. How are we intending to accomplish that? Well, by putting a stop to new exploration. Okay, it means several things. First of all, contracts that are already signed are going to be honored. Okay, so that is the first thing. We're not intending to go to court or being dragged to court by anybody. We are respecting all the contracts that are already there. Where we are putting the pinch is in exploration that is already at a very low level right now. So that has several implications. First, there will be exploration. Okay. When the Petro administration starts, there will still be exploration because there are exploration contracts right now. There are exploration concessions that haven't even started exploring. Okay, so there will be more prospecting for oil in the years to come. Our estimates indicate that this pinch in exploration will give us a window of 15 years of smooth decline of oil exports, and that will generate the ability of the economy to adapt. Some people say, well, why do it at all? Why not just letting the market decide what's going to happen with your oil trajectory? This is a deep philosophical discussion problem. We think that, I mean, if you think about oil, it is a market that is full with all sorts of externalities that we don't even know how many they are. The consensus about what needs to be done keeps changing and keeps becoming more and more pessimistic. Keep in mind that the issues of climate change are becoming more and more alarming. So there is a very real prospect. It's a very real prospect that the price of oil will have a precipitous decline in 10 or 15 years. So in that sense, just going with the flow, trying pedal to the metal, exporting as much as possible, it runs several risks. One is in 10 or 15 years, if that sharp drop happens, Colombia will face a major trade crisis, a major foreign exchange crisis. And in the meantime, we will have loaded Ecopetrol, which is the crown jewel of Colombia state, with a bunch of assets that will depreciate overnight. So instead of just falling off that cliff, which we think is a very real prospect, our proposal is why not starting now with just this tiny pinch on exploration that will give us a predictable trend in our oil exports and will give us time to adapt. So exploration will keep going. Okay? Exploitation will keep going. Exports will keep going. And here, okay, I will confess that this is one thing where the campaign has to clarify its messaging. Several months ago, there were some voices within the campaign saying that we should put a stop to oil exports. Okay. No, we had a, that was just not good messaging. It was not clear thinking. Okay. So, I mean, in that sense, I think we can take credit for having set the record straight inside the campaign. Like, I mean, you know, the Pacto Histórico was a large, I mean, I keep saying it's a campaign, not a church, okay? So we have lots of voices, okay? And so sometimes we have to have some conversations and so, but yeah, so oil exports will continue and you know, and the market will help us allocate between domestic and external consumption, okay? But yeah, so that's kind of what happens as regards oil. Pensions. Our pension reform is basically to bring us into line with the recommendations that the World Bank have made and many other multilateral organizations and the practice in many of the countries, which is what is known as the pillar system. Okay. Right now, we have a system in which private pensions compete with public pensions. And this is actually quite unique. Okay. In Colombia, it is considered normal. It is, I think only Colombia and Peru have the system, okay? I'm not a pensions expert, but some people say that this is really a rarity. So it is strange that we are talking about pensions in Colombia as if what we have right now is normal. It is not normal, okay? And it is not working. It is not delivering pensions. People are not able right now to reach a pension plan. Well, they have a pension plan, but when they retire, they are not actually getting pensions. So our proposal is, let's reallocate the funds, you know, so that we can transition to a pillar system. Of course, it's not going to happen overnight. Anything that you do with pensions will need to come together with a transition plan. But so our transition, part of our transition plan is, let's start changing the direction of the flows of pension savings so that we set a threshold, okay, of 4 minimum wages, okay. And if earnings below those 4 minimum wages, they go to feed the public pension system. Anything above that will feed into the private pension system. Okay, so that is the pillar system. Okay, so what will that accomplish? It will accomplish several things. First, it will help us guarantee the pensions for many people that are not seeing their that are not retiring, are not able to retire right now. So that is what you accomplish with the pay-as-you-go system. You create a robust defined benefits component that people can rely on. It will maintain the benefits of the private pension system because people will still be going into the defined contribution component of it. Okay, you know, that will bring incentives for savings and so on. Okay, it will help fiscal consolidation as well, because as things stand right now, Colombia as a state is having to back up the pension system with an additional 1% of GDP because of the imbalances between the two, between the pay-as-you-go and the defined contribution system. Okay. As a result of this misallocation between contributors and pensioners and so on, right now, out of the pocket of the central government, 1% of GDP is going to supplement the pensions. So if you put a stop to that, that will also contribute to increase, like I said before, the savings rate and the ability of the government to do public investment. Okay. It will also place a cap on pensions coming from the public system. It will rationalize pensions in the public system, okay, instead of having some pensions that just go off the charts and so on. So it will finally bring some rationality to that and will make it more fair, more equitable, more progressive. Now, and like I said before, also more efficient, at least from the fiscal point of view. So that is our proposal. Critics have been saying, well, one of the campaigns that is no longer running was saying, well, 4 minimum wages is too ambitious. Well, we can discuss. We understand this is going to be something that will be negotiated in the legislature, okay? But we definitely like the philosophy of this approach, a transition to a pillar system that allows us to keep the best of both worlds, allows us to keep us the defined benefits part, which allows for some redistribution within the population, and the defined contributions part that incentivizes savings and so on.
Thank you very much, Luis Fernando. I have a number of questions, but I think maybe what I'll do is take one from our listeners, one of our stakeholders from the United States, and it says, can you elucidate how the U.S.-Colombia FTA might be changed? And the candidate has just talked about that a little bit. And I guess we can expand that to various FTA or all FTAs that Colombia has, or it certainly has one with Canada. How could the FTA treaty terms be reopened? What are the downsides and upsides of that gesture for the economic and trade relations with the U.S. and by extension to other countries where there might be a re-examination of those trade agreements? Let's stop there with the question. There's more, but I think that's the gist.
Sure. Look, talking about FTA. Okay, first of all, one thing that we have decided that will be done in the first 3 months is something that should have been done in the past is to have a comprehensive evaluation of the different FTAs. At this point, we have several of them. All of them are incredibly complex, and there has been no systematic effort at evaluating them. Okay, so that's the first thing. So during the campaign, there's been like several ideas floated, but they still don't amount to to a definite strategy, because that strategy cannot be carried out until we have a comprehensive evaluation of the FTAs. What the campaign has been saying in this regard is that at first glance, you can identify some points where the FTAs could be improved bilaterally. There is nothing brash. There is nothing, I mean, we're not trying to impose anything on anybody for so long as we cannot. We're a small economy, a small country. So everything has to be bilateral. Everything has to be agreed upon by all the parties involved. So first question, what are the costs of this approach? Of course, if you push too far, you can crash out of the FTAs, and that is a horrible thing to happen. Okay, we understand that FTAs have been a good instrument for the insertion of Colombia's economy into the world markets. We have gained access to many markets and so on. So we're not intending to just get out of that and go back to WTO rules. That would be a really foolish approach. Okay. So what we're saying is, let's identify areas where both countries can benefit. So for instance, the one lengthy conversation I've had, well, not lengthy, but the one detailed conversation I had with a particular FTA, for example, one of our experts was saying that our FTA with Korea, for example, there's room for improvement there, in the sense that probably we did not emphasize enough technology transfers. Okay, there is a lot of potential for technology transfer from Korea to Colombia, and we kind of didn't bring that up. Okay, the FTA with the US is, and Canada, those are very complex. Okay, I think that there are some issues in the US economy. This is not campaign thinking, but this is from reading what American economists have been saying about trade in the US. Looks like the US sometimes have been too protective of some of its markets to the detriment of developing countries. For instance, services that are becoming increasingly important. I spoke a while ago about telemedicine. Okay, healthcare is one sector in the US that is heavily protected. Okay, and so maybe, I don't know. I mean, of course, I understand that this protection is deeply ingrained in the US system. It is part of what has built the healthcare system. But maybe you can nudge the US in the direction of, hey, why don't you open your markets of healthcare services? Now that we are in the era of telemedicine, for example. Accounting, for example, my profession is heavily regulated in the US, and we could export those kind of services. So maybe there's room for improvement in that sense. People talk a lot about agriculture, because we need to know what is happening there. Of course, there's the perennial issue of the subsidies of agriculture in developed countries and so on. So maybe that is something that can be addressed. But maybe the most important thing, I mean, part of the issue with the FTAs has been self-inflicted. Colombia has not taken advantage of the FTAs in the right way. Sometimes we're inconsistent. For example, we keep sending mixed messages regarding environmental services. Okay? So sometimes we act as if we want to export environmental services where we have great potential, and then we say something else through another agency that allows the destruction of those environments. So to some extent, we also need to get our act together, okay, with the FTAs. But the key point at this point is we don't intend to crash out of FTAs. That's not the way you conduct economic policy in the 21st century, okay? We just want a friendly process of talking about where are opportunities for mutual benefit and through the FTAs.
Thanks, Luis Fernando. I have another question from a listener, and it's a bit long. We'll see if we can follow it all the way through. It says agro industry should be a key component in Gustavo Petro's plan to diversify the economy in Colombia but Colombia needs to make a big change in the way it promotes the agri-food products in the international markets, especially those products coming from the small farmers, economías campesinas y familiares. The question is, how are you visualizing a new way to link these farmers with international consumers? What should be pro-Colombia and other agricultural governmental institution strategy? Do you have an innovative plan with respect to that? So there's a few questions in there, but do you know that the totality of what that issue is about?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, apparently we have somebody in filter from the campaign because that question is pretty much consistent with what we have been saying. Yes, definitely. This is the path we want to chart, okay, in terms of agro-industry. I couldn't have put it better myself, okay. Now, in terms of the strategies, yeah, definitely in fact, we had a very productive chat with the Council of Competitiveness, now, of which ProColombia is part. This is a major system of private sector initiatives. Yeah. And yeah, definitely, probably one of the main drawbacks of our current strategy has been that we do not pay close attention to the world markets. So we start our productivity policy and then try to figure out where to market that, okay? Probably when in this meeting, we identified that, well, maybe one thing where the public sector could help, or basically, before doing that, before going into that, the first step should be try to identify first what is out there in the world markets, and start building from there, building backwards from there, okay? And once you identify those opportunities, then of course public investment can help, okay? So for instance, Colombia Productiva has been a very successful case. Of course, it's been relatively tight in the scheme of things. Now, this figure of escrow, of fiduciary commitments, where you nurture some small firms and so on. So there you take, of course, we're working with very prime raw material because we're taking very nice initiatives and so on. But if you could scale up this kind of figures, and bring them to the small producers, coupled with technology transfer, for example. There is some. I had a meeting with somebody a few days ago from the agrarian sector, from the small peasants side of the industry of the sector, and he was saying there's great potential. For example, we have already created some associations of small peasants, okay, but we'll always kind of end up in the same place with irrigation. Yeah? We already have some expertise in that. It would be great if we could scale that up to negotiate for raw materials and maybe also for access into markets and so on. So yeah, definitely I agree with that. That is kind of what we want to do, agro-industry that is nurturing the small and medium peasants now. And there, yeah, the state has, through its strategies of development bank and so on, it can do a lot of hand holding, okay? Of course, we don't want to take over things. We want to do the hand holding that needs to be done. And like I said before, our combination of development banking and nurturing regional technology transfer and so on, these things we believe can make a major difference.
Thank you, Luis Fernando. There's another question here, which I'll get to in a second. But one of the other comments that one hears in Colombia is even those who don't love the economic plans of candidate Petro, but might feel that there's a way to live within them. The criticism sometimes one hears, at least in private quarters, is, okay, that plan is, we may not agree with all of it, and some of it may not be realistic, but we could live with it. But the problem is will President, if it were to be President Petro, listen to his economic team and his economic advisors, or is he going to go off in some other direction and decide that, as they would say, has a pattern of history of doing what he wants to do without necessarily following the best advice of his better advisors? What is the real? What is your? Obviously, I mean, and there, like in every campaign, as you say, it's not a church. There's going to be disparate opinions coming out, and sometimes they're contradictory. And we appreciate your candidness in correcting or having a different opinion about what came out, at least on one of the aspects. But what assurances, if that's the word, or what has been your relationship that leads you to believe that candidate Petro would in fact follow the advice of his advisors and you, let's say you and the team we're talking with today?
Let me say something small, Fernando. Maybe.
Yeah, sure, Diego. Welcome.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Basically, I want to say something like, for example, all the economic program was built not just the three of us. It's a big team, more than 15 persons giving different ideas. And most of these ideas are the ideas that Petro has taken for his speech and for different debates. So basically, he is listening, not just the team. Well, the Pacto Histórico is a program that has been consolidating with many different forces, with many economic ideas. Luis Fernando is coming from neoclassical background and coming from post-Keynesian background. And we have been able to build a really consolidated good proposal in terms of the fiscal reform that we're proposing, and that now Petro's candidate support. It's an idea of the whole economic team. Basically, in terms of pension, the pillar system is not his idea. It's coming also from different people. So basically, it's not something that he's doing what he wants, as you know, like you are not expert in everything. Actually, many of his views regarding to the central bank independence has been moderating. Now we never have say nothing in this campaign about central, that we are not going to respect the central bank independence. At some point in the pandemic, Petro said, okay, this could be a possibility from a loan from the central bank to the government, and it's something allowed by the national constitution, but it was in the middle of the pandemic 2 or 3 years ago, was not in the campaign. It was different historical moment, and some people misunderstood this message. But basically, the macroeconomic stability, it's going to be respect, and basically we're in contact with Petro, and not every day or not every week in the last two months. That has been pretty much rushed. But in the part of the design the economic plan, we hold different long meetings with the candidate, trying to present different proposals to try to have the final program. So at the end of the day, it's not that he's going to say crazy thing. Here is a plan. In the competence in the other campaign, there are no plans. Basically, you don't have any kind of economic technical discussion about, okay, your fiscal reform is going to try to take 3% of the GDP, 5% of the GDP. No, there is nothing. There is more uncertainty in the other campaign. Basically, there are some ideas, there are some plans in terms of fiscal consolidation, in terms of a standard macroeconomic policy. So there should not be fear. Basically, in terms of pension, we're not doing something crazy. We're just trying to find a balance between private system and public system, because the problem of a fully private funded system in pension is the replacement rate. When you have the replacement rates, that is the percentage of the wage that you're going to get when you retire, is just like 25-30%, and this is creating social discontent, social explosions, and we don't want that again. On the other hand, we are aware of the public burden of the public pension system, and this is the idea. What we have the pillar after a certain level of minimum wage, you should go to the private system. So there should not be problems in that way. So basically, just want to add this small thing for maybe to help for this question.
Yeah, I mean,
thanks, Diego.
Let me add a tiny comment. Yeah, I mean, I think that there are some realities that transcend individuals. Okay, first of all, there's one stubborn fact, which is that the Colombian people decided on March 13 that they wanted to be ruled by multi-party coalitions in Congress. We're a presidential system, but the Colombian people decided in Congress we don't want to give the majority to anybody. Okay, so that means that anything we want to accomplish in Colombia has to be done at this point through negotiations with parties. There is nothing that nobody will be able to change. Okay, the Pacto Histórico has the largest caucus in Congress. Okay, so we are able to start negotiations in an orderly fashion with other parties. We can tell them, hey, come to the table, let's hash this out. You know, this is our roadmap. You can help us improve it and so on. You know? The other candidate in the runoff doesn't have a parliamentary caucus. Okay, so it will be a scramble to see how he will negotiate. Okay, if we come to government, okay, you know, that obviously dictates a lot of the process. Okay, regardless of the individual traits of different people. Okay, so there are those realities. Okay, so this image that the president can simply do anything in a rush, okay, I think it ignores the fact that there are all these structures induced in the process. Second, the Palacio and the Casa Nariño is a very complex bureaucracy. The finance ministry is a very complex bureaucracy where we have years and years of accumulated expertise in the finance ministry, in the central bank, in the planning department, and so on. So those are things that bring ballast to what you are trying to the policy process. You have to rely on all those experts. So many of them are really world-class experts in our finance ministry and so on. So these are the ingredients you have to work with, regardless of who is in power. Okay, so that's kind of what I will add to what Diego was saying. Okay.
Thanks, Luis Fernando. I know we're running short of time. There is one other question from a listener, so if we can get through that, that would be wonderful. And it's on pensions again. And as you know, Luis Fernando, there's been a lot of conversation about pensions during this campaign, and and for a number of years in Colombia about pension reform. The question goes, it is not clear that the proposal would help fiscal consolidation, as candidate Petro has said, that will spend the short-term windfall, and also keeps regressive public regime as it gives higher subsidies to people with higher incomes. Moreover, future governments will need to cover the continuous fiscal cost of those subsidies. Do you want to take that as the final question?
Yeah, sure. Although maybe Diego Ricardo want to add something, but
Okay.
quickly. Okay. So first, we have never said that we intend to fritter away the savings that are generated through this transition. Like I said before, if you add the assets and liabilities of the pension system, both pension systems, the private and the public, they are actually balanced. Okay. What is happening right now is because of the weird way of allocating them, the government is putting into the system 1% of GDP. Okay. So that's what we want to be able to save. And we've never said, and that is a misrepresentation of what we've been saying. And I've heard it from many eminent economists. They think that we're just going to fritter your way in all sorts of programs. That's not true. We think that is also part of the public investment, the savings process that we want to trigger in Colombia. Okay. Second, the sustainability of the system. I mean, in terms of the subsidies for high pensions. Okay. There are two things that you have to keep in mind. First of all, the pillar system we're proposing already brings some rationality to those pensions, because it places a limit on the publicly funded pensions as we move forward. Okay, because if you have a pillar system, then the parameters of the system already place a cap on that. Then the other part is people talk about the very high pensions and so on that are coming from the public sector. Problem is, and I would love to hear a realistic proposal for that, because that part of the pension component, that is actually 3% of GDP coming from the public, from the central government. That is not nothing. Okay. The problem is that so far the courts have said you cannot touch it. Okay. So when people in the campaigns, in other campaigns, say, "Oh, we're going to put an end to that," I'm really curious if there's any good idea. I would embrace it. If we can bring some rationality to that, would be great. So far, the Constitutional Court has said, no, those are rights that people have because of the pension regimes, military, police, teachers, and so on. Although teachers are kind of badly treated because they are not really part of the problem. They are not, their salaries are not huge, okay? So, but there are a lot of these special regimes that were never changed, okay? And some of those pensions are actually very high. but so far courts have said you cannot touch them. So at this point, the only remedy is to wait for biology to do its thing, and those systems will die off. Okay, but so far, I mean, I would be glad if we're in government to hear good ideas about what to do with that. But so far, I haven't seen any.
Thanks, Luis Fernando. Diego, I think Luis is going to give you the last word if you want to take it.
No, I think that regarding pension system, that there is something important just to clarify. In terms of public pension, it's around 4 billion pesos, but of those 4 billion, 3 billions are from the army, from the public teachers, and you cannot touch them because there are special regimes. So basically, with this public reform, we just want to try to approach to this 1 billion, that it's the one that it's in Colpensiones. I know that some people are really worried about the high subsidies, and this is true, but there is just a small part of high wage workers who are there. And basically with the pillar system is that we want to correct. The people that already have these high subsidies, you can do nothing because it's already a right that they have been got. So basically you cannot touch them because in the Colombian law, you cannot change this high level of pension. But for the new workers and of course you need a transition regime. This is not something that is going to happen from one day to another day. The moving to a pillar system also require a change in the parameters. So, and it's something that when you go in detail in terms of pension reforms, you need to discuss. You need to discuss the number of weeks, even you need to discuss if you are going to equilibrate the age between man and woman. So basically, it's not just something that to do an easy calculation. You need to think also in different parameters of pension reform, and also take into account that part of the public deficit in pension is not the Colpensiones, the pay-as-you-go system. This is not part of the big part is in military teachers, and maybe in the future, but it's not a short road reform. Basically, the new teachers are now in the standard system. So this is something also that we need to take into account, and basically to find a good balance. The message is clear here in the experience with Chile. 100% private system for pension is not working in terms that the replacement rate is really low, and it's creating a lot of social discontent. So basically, we need to find an equilibrium between the two systems, and this is the pillar system that Luis Fernando explained. So no, that's all. We're running out of time. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for reminding me, because I do sometimes run over. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time this morning. I think we finished basically right when we said we would. And Ricardo, who's not with us at the moment, but to Ricardo, Luis Fernando, and Diego, mil gracias for your time. We wish you luck as we do with all candidates on the campaign, and try and get some sleep over the next 10 days.
Thank you very much.